Welcome. My name is Ruth Nicholson. I'm a customer success coach here at Team Genius, and I also work with the GO program, helping organizations with their governance and operations. Today we wanted to welcome you and talk about hockey tryouts, the art of a good hockey tryout. And a number of you have joined us. I want to invite you to use the chat box. Let us know who you are, what your club is, and where you're from. Get a sense of who's joining us. We are really blessed today to have two folks with us who know what they're talking about. Roland Sear is from Ontario, Canada, one of the hotbeds of hockey up there. He's been the general manager at Kitchener Minor Hockey for about 12 years and is a full-time day-to-day operations general manager. So he is in the thick of it in terms of operations and how to make this thing work. Brady Peterson is from the US side of the border in Minnesota. And he's the hockey director at Chisago Lakes Hockey Association. He's got about 300 players and 70 coaches and managers, and actually is not full-time in hockey. He also has a day job, so splits his time between the two. What we're going to do today is we're going to spend about 20 or 30 minutes talking with Roland and Brady, and then open it up to your questions and what your concerns are about hockey tryouts. And so we've taken the name A.R.T, A-R-T, and divided it up into 3 pieces because that was convenient. So we're going to talk about assessing players and logistics. What does it look like running a hockey tryout right now when you're facing a lot of different rules and protocols now in the rinks and from your rules from your leagues and your state associations and your national bodies? Then we're going to talk about ranking players and how do you actually, take a big group of players and get them ranked down so you can set yourself up to create teams. And the T is the tactics about creating teams at the end of tryouts to actually get kids in the right place to play and have a good experience. And then we will open it up to your questions. So we've got a couple of people who are popping into the meeting. As we go along, feel free to type in questions in the chat box. I'll either ask you to ask them yourself, or if you want me to read them, we can do that as well, whichever way you want to do it. Hopefully you have found the chat box, that we are zoomed out enough. We know where that is now. So with that, let's get started. Thank you, Roland and Brady, for being with us today. So Roland, you've actually been on a number of conversations with Team Genius. I love having you with us. Can you talk about the special requirements and the rules that you're now having to deal with just to logistically hold tryouts? And how are you coping with them?
That's probably the most interesting part. Logistically, we're not allowed to hold tryouts. So what we've done is we have contingency plans. So I've done a little PowerPoint presentation, if you don't mind me sharing my screen here.
Cool.
And we'll kind of, I think that's disabled right at the moment. If you could re-engage that for me, that would be great.
So our tech person from Team Genius is Ben Baker. He's over there. He's going to make this technology work for us.
Thank you, Ben. All right.
Sweet.
So let's make this big. Can everybody see that? Hopefully, thumbs up. All right. So welcome, everyone, and thank you very much for having me, Ruth. I like being here, and most of all, my favorite part's I get to learn too, because this is truly a group that discusses many different aspects. And, we're experts in our area, but we're not necessarily experts across the nation or across North America, because everybody functions under different rules. So I'm going to start just by simply saying anything I say today. Obviously, I've said we're not holding tryouts. Our governing body is prohibiting that at the moment. Doesn't mean we won't be shortly or in a slightly longer term. But that being said, we have a lot of contingency plans. And I want to remind everyone, I am not a lawyer nor a doctor, so anything I say is not medical or legal advice. They're just what we're doing. Yeah, can you tell I've kind of done this sort of thing before? First thing I would recommend that anybody do is examine your environment. You need to understand. So whoever's in charge of your tryouts has to understand the environment that you're in. So you need to know what your local health units are saying. They are the experts medically. And I realize sometimes government politically moves things forward, but for you to truly understand how you're going to operate, find out what your local health experts are saying as to the state of COVID-19 in your area and what you should or shouldn't be doing. That will help alleviate some level of liability for yourselves, which is always important because the liability doesn't just fall in these situations to the association. It falls to the players, right? If somebody knowingly brings something in, we can still mitigate some of those factors by how we operate. That being said, they're still going to be responsible for themselves, and some insurance, like Hockey Canada insurance, covers them. Some sport insurance doesn't. I know in BC, the government has recently passed legislation covering all sport participants for things like COVID. Or at least that's my understanding from way over here in Ontario. Which is awesome. We are in an active letter campaign to encourage the Ontario government to do the same thing for all sport. You need to understand what your local government requirements and restrictions are, and that could include how common standing legislation for accessibility and inclusion will impact current COVID requirements. Things like a mask bylaw, who has to wear it, who doesn't, and what the preclusions or exclusions are for participating. You need to understand what your governing body is allowing you to do. So right now, my municipality has a more open approach than our governing body. So they will allow me to have 17 people on the ice. My governing body is still at 9. Now, as of tonight, my governing body is jumping to 25. They'll be ahead of the municipality. But you have to understand how those work and what you're going to have to function within. Then you need to understand what your members want. And that becomes a key role, and we'll talk a bit more about that. And then lastly, you need to communicate with your facility and ensure that whatever processes both of you have, the key to getting people in and out of the building safely so you can assess the skill to the best of your ability really works with that facility. Whether they're a municipality or whether they're private, you need to work hand in glove because there's more than just you in that building. And confrontation and conflict can really slow you down or pull your attention away from what is important at this time. So we're going to go back and revisit each one of those and then a couple extra steps. And then again, we can all certainly discuss any one of these afterwards. So the first is understanding your local health units and what they want. So for example, here in Kitchener, we're only allowed up to 17 people. It's the municipality enforcing it, but they're taking that direction from public health. We're not allowed spectators at the moment. Our physical distance must still be adhered to, so 6 feet or 2 meters for you Canadians. And we are required to have signage posted throughout the building for all of that. And then we have gone ahead and posted further signage that covers off our rules. So anytime you're in the building, if you want to see what's allowed and what isn't, just look at a wall because it is everywhere and it's very clear to everybody. And then lastly, we are required to have an increased cleaning protocol. So for us, what that means is we don't have any change rooms. So the chairs the kids are using to put on their skates, they're arriving fully clothed. Those chairs are cleaned in between every session. Our equipment that we use on the ice, the pucks, the cones, the nets, they're all sprayed down with a disinfectant between every session. It takes 30 seconds. It's not cumbersome, and it's a step that really has made our parents go, you're taking this seriously. Wow, thank you. And we're moving forward. So while I say we're not conducting tryouts, we are on the ice. We are actively participating in skills sessions. And we're cohorting our kids as to the requirements of public health. Every different area will be have different requirements because in some parts of Canada, I know there are no cases of COVID active, whereas where we are in Southern Ontario, it was one of the larger outbreaks when we were full on, and now it's slowing down a fair bit. And in our region in particular, for the last 3 days, we've had no cases. So it's it's moving in the right direction. We're getting to where we need to go, and we're starting to see that things are progressing, and we're able to already have plans in place because we're communicating with public health as to what the next step is coming. We might not know when, but what's the next step, and we can have contingencies. With our government, we had to make sure that their communications to the public get translated for our participants. The government of Ontario has already said we can move to games. What wasn't clear in their announcement was, hey, you have to provide a plan from your governing body to the government in order to be able to do that, and it has to demonstrate a staged approach. So in covering yourself for liability, that move to games would include tryouts at some point. You have to understand when those are and how you can implement them. So again, I encourage you to know what the PPE will be required, the personal protective equipment, what the spacing will be required for you. The move of the Ontario government will be to lessen physical distancing while on the ice, but maintain it while off the ice. So players, as the announcement comes out from our governing body, who's working directly with the province, will indicate how much that's shrinking and when we're allowed to return to a more scrimmage-like environment. And I'll talk a bit more about that after, is that's when we're going to return to probably some step more towards tryouts as we get there. But our governing body will make that determination. We just have a plan in place in case. The mainstream regulations, so things in Ontario here, for example, we have the Access for Ontarians Act, which ensures that we are providing accessible programming. So the programming we have to adhere to ensures that even people with physical limitations or medical limitations are accommodated within the program if they request. So it may mean a slower return to hockey for us. So understand whether something like that exists in your area and conduct yourself as you're required when you go through that. And what I mean, to give a concrete answer, somebody, let's say, who has a respiratory issue, who's participated with us for 5 to 10 years, they want to play hockey, but they can only do it with the following accommodations: that we maintain a 6-foot distance. We may be required to have that entire division maintain a 6-foot distance. Hard to run a tryout while you're doing that with hockey, but there are ways to get around that and means to do that. Those are just some of the requirements we may face. So we've created plans as to what we can do to do that and work with that individual parent. Understanding those restrictions for your governing bodies, your sport governing bodies. The OHF currently right now is not allowing us to conduct tryouts. So if we're not allowed to and we can return to games, we're going to select our teams based on last year's teams. If you made the team last year, you'll make the team this year, with the caveat that we will replace any missing players with affiliate players, because we may still have players who don't want to return because the concept of COVID makes them uncomfortable, or they cannot participate due to a health requirement during COVID. So having a plan in place as to what you would do if you're just not even allowed to enter the ice. For us, it's status quo. And our rationale behind that is it's far easier to say that tryouts were fair last year, so we're going to stick with them because we're limited, to move forward this year with development. What are your date restrictions? When can you do something? When can't you do something? When does your league allow you to start? Work with your league to push that date off if you have to. I'm not sure how everybody's league works. We are very fortunate to participate within Alliance Hockey in Ontario. And even something as simple as saying, you know what, with a month's notice, we're not going to be able to conduct tryouts quickly and effectively, which is the only fair way to do it, if we start AAA hockey September 2nd. So why don't we push that start of hockey to the middle of September or to the end of September, depending on what your personal environment allows, and take the time to put the structure into place. So work with your partners, that you participate with in your league to generate appropriate timelines this year. Yes, it's change, but I think that safety will allow for us to participate ultimately to the best of our ability. And then finally, what are your competition restrictions? What are you allowed to do on the ice as far as, can you scrimmage? Can you conduct games outside of your health unit? So one of the comments from the OHF has been a possibility that we may be competing against one another, but limited by geography within our local health unit. So when there's a change in the outbreak, if a second wave occurs or if something else happens, we are participating with like groups that won't then leave somebody without someone to play with. Because if we fall back, everybody in our group will fall back, because it'll be public health who limits that. So look for competition partners that are going to facilitate the best outcome for everybody, and you'll be doing the same thing as your surrounding neighbors then. Understand what your membership desires and what their limitations are. Send them a survey. It's that simple. We've done about 4 of them since COVID started. For us, I can safely say my AAA parents want tryouts. Even the concept that they would all be back on the team. They want to know that we're going to ice the best team, because the best team supports their kids' development. Knowing that not only helps me communicate with my league and the OHF, it also helps me communicate back to them if we're not going to be successful in achieving that. And if we don't know that, we will have a lot of people around the tryout process, which parents really want to feel is fair. They're going to believe it isn't, because they're not in the know and they're not being communicated with. So ask them the questions, get their feedback, provide the results of those surveys publicly. You know, don't ask for people to identify themselves, just put out the general summaries of the questions so you can address them and make sure people are all on board. So we talk about communicating with our facility. For us, that was the cleaning schedule, who was responsible for it, and ensuring we weren't assuming any liability that shouldn't be ours. The facility's theirs. It's theirs to clean. So our municipality was fantastic to work with, and they've assumed the general building cleaning, and we clean anything that is ours. So if it's equipment we take out onto the ice and take off the ice when we leave, that's ours. If it's theirs, they do it. The only thing we've agreed mutually is that we'll sanitize the nets, because it's much easier for us to put all our equipment between sessions on the net and just spray the whole thing down at the same time. Wayfinding, work with them to understand. So this will be a key one during tryouts. Where are you going to do your sign-in? Where are you getting your bib or your penny to be identified who you are on the ice? Where are you going to put your equipment on? Even if dressing rooms are open right now, most of them have lowered occupancy rates. And so that will limit how many dressing rooms you might have in an entire facility, how early the next group can arrive before this group leaves. Currently for us, the city of Kitchener has built in a 15-minute buffer between every rental. So one group can completely leave before the next group is allowed into the building. So knowing that wayfinding will really help us say to parents, okay, don't arrive an hour early, do your mental prep in the car, do it where you need to, come, and this is where you're going to go. You're going to come, you're going to greet the person at the door. They're going to give you your ID number. You're going to proceed to a chair that they're also going to give you. That chair will then be a separate number you get. So your ID number later is used to see if you've moved on to the next level of tryouts. And that chair number is going to be where you sit whenever you come for a tryout. And that way you're in the same location all the time. It becomes familiar. And then what is the means at which you leave the building? For us, we're moving towards spectators, but there will be some limits on how many will be allowed in the building. So 1 per person, even during a tryout. I think many hockey associations will probably appreciate that, 1 or none, but it gives our coaches the power to watch the players and select. Apologize. There we go. Signage, again, we've discussed that with the facility. Programming relationships with other users. So understand if there's anybody coming in after you, that the city has communicated to them the same wayfinding, so you're not overlapping each other or Why is that group getting to do something we're not allowed to do? The skating clubs have some very different rules than we have as hockey, because we have different governing bodies. So understanding the differences there has been a key for us. Step 2 is being prepared in advance. So all those other, equip yourself with the information. Step 2 is be well out in front of this. Get a plan and work your plan. I'm a big fan of the saying, failing to plan is planning to fail. So if we get out ahead of things, we want to make sure that we have enough time to establish safe processes. And if we don't, we move tryouts back. For right now, our plan includes not allowing walk-ons. So all attendees must register in advance so we understand what kind of numbers we're going to experience. We could possibly add an extra session at a later date if tryout times will allow. We're waiting to hear, if we have tryouts, what the time frame will be for each of them, and that will allow any latecomers or people on F1 waivers to still pre-register and get out to a time rather than just walking out with cash and worrying about handing stuff off and putting employees at risk or volunteers at risk. Do away with releases done in a small room and in person. You know, very often people were finding ways, at least in Canada, to use a room in the rink and get themselves established and then release kids. Well, that's a lot of mixing air. It's a lot of small confined spaces that may not have the best protocols. So what we're looking at doing is moving all of that stuff online. So we've always conducted the first, or at least the last 5 years, conducted the first few rounds of our player releases online, and we're now just calling them our player selections. We post the ID number, we give every player, and we allow them to come back into the fold for the next tryout. And if your number does not appear, you can then reach out to the coach and ask for any feedback as to why you may or may not have been selected. And the coaches are expected to be able to have either an online meeting with them or a phone call to provide them with that feedback. That would have been the primary reason for having an in-person conversation. The online selections have worked really well for us. We dropped from players waiting in line for over an hour. It's not uncommon for us to have, at certain levels of hockey, over 100, 150 players trying out at a level. Instead of waiting in line for an hour or two to get released, it's quickly done by a post on our website. And it's been one of the #1 survey feedbacks that the parents in the early levels really appreciate, not having to have that wait in line. Many of them knew their kid wasn't going to the next level and would feel that that was a better use of their and their child's time. And then again, as I'd said, coaches still must make themselves available for that conversation. Step 3, over communicate. We make sure that we use everything in our power to get the message out to our parents: videos, email, website content. So for our summer skills sessions, we posted wayfinding videos for the kids. I had my daughter come through, we videoed her, and this is what it would look like in the rink, because mom and dad weren't allowed in with them. And we had a lot of good feedback. So the same thing I would suggest you do with your tryouts. Where am I going to go? Who am I going to see? And get the players on board so they understand. They're very visual now. Kids don't necessarily read directions as much as follow a YouTube video as to how to do something. And so we found communicating with them in the way that works for them has really streamlined processes for us. So I encourage that for your tryouts. At the time of registration for your tryouts, have all of the parents, and if you can, any of the older participants, sign or check indicating that they've read and understand all your rules and that they're willing to follow them. Our experience has been so far with COVID that we have some people who really aren't as in line, whether it's they want the rules to be more strict or they want the rules to be less strict. By this way, it's at least acknowledging they can't say, I didn't know. And we don't have any blow-ups when they arrive at the arena for their tryout. Step 4 is what happens on the ice. And I think Brady will be talking a bit more about that later. But for me, the key things here are keep your registration numbers to a limit that supports all the rules that you're required to follow. So if it's 17 players, if it's keep a 6-foot distance, whatever that rule is, take a good assessment and apply your structure to that, right? And you'll be able to drive that participation to its limit and be successful seeing the kids play against one another. I highly encourage the use of video during your tryouts. This supports, if you've got to split the kids up instead of 50 or 60 on an ice time, trying to compare them against one another in drills or in a scrimmage, if you have to have smaller numbers because your area requires it, use video. And then compare the two videos. Use a side-by-side look on one screen and who's executing the skill better, who's doing what. Design your drills to follow any of the processes that public health or your governing body are allowing. So every drill we run in our summer skills program right now is physically distant. We have no battle drills, no anything. We're just really hoping to have the best group of stick handlers we've ever had. So we're working through trying to do our best. And then in the end, speak with last year's coaches. Get feedback as to what players did what at each team and at each level, especially with those AP players. That's going to allow you to understand where they fit in when they were called up and where they fit in on their own team. That was my quick summary, so hopefully I didn't steal too much time.
Thank you, Roland. And remember, we are going to have time for questions, so make sure you save those for us. Brady is from the U.S., just south of Canada in Minnesota. And I wanted to transition to sort of the tactical piece of this. So Brady, when you actually get to have tryouts and you're ranking players and getting them on teams, talk a little bit about how you approach that and how you make that work.
Well, I'll first say that I'm glad we don't have all the same restrictions that Roland is dealing with up there. I mean, we are much more able to run our tryouts. But I will say this, I would love to be able to not have tryouts and have our coaches pick our teams without any of the necessity to go through and find evaluators and then have parents mad at me. I'm already catching enough spears as it is, even when we have former AHL and NHL guys doing evaluations, they still think they got it wrong half the time. But nonetheless, for me, and I'll kind of relate this to my experience with Team Genius. I think it's our 4th or 5th year that we've used Team Genius. And one of the things that for us that we try to do, and we're a small association, right? We've got under 300, right around 300 kids. And when it comes to tryouts, we're talking about 120 of those kids. The rest are real young mites. We don't do evaluations on them. We place them based on first age, then skill that the coaches know, and then who they're friends with. And we want to keep retention that way. And our retention numbers have shot through the roof by doing that with those young kids. So we try and keep them there with community-based association. But when it comes to the evaluation side of things, we're pretty open and ruthless about trying to use their scores in Team Genius to statistically look at narrowing down our bubble for whatever that line is for that team that we're creating. And so our tactics as far as the evaluation goes, okay, we do scrimmaging and we emphasize that, and then we do skill-based things as well. But we fluctuate through that, and we are specifically trying to drive to that bubble. So after the first day of tryouts, for example, we've got the same evaluators looking at all these same kids, and again, we're smaller. So we want to make sure that we have that we've narrowed down at least, and we actually in our handbook we refer to it as the top 5, bottom 5, but it could be top 3, it could be top 9, it could be whatever. That we want to remove outliers as we run through the process. And what Team Genius lets us do is, first of all, our evaluators have to evaluate everybody. They can't skim over somebody because you get a red light, yellow light, green light on each of those kids, and then on the whole system, evaluation system for them. So that forces all of our evaluators to get through everybody. And now this year, we are requiring comment on every kid. We didn't require that before. but we're utilizing the feature of pre-populating comments, so we can force in comments in there, so they don't have to actually do it. They don't have to actually go and type in or speak in any of the comments. It's just obviously a feature of the software. But now we'll load in maybe a dozen of those, and we're working through that with the coaches now. But all of these things, we're trying to force ourselves into getting to essentially the last day of tryouts, where we know, statistically speaking, and just for those who care, like that, for me, my degree is math, so I like looking at these. I looking at standard deviations and trying to figure out, like I don't want anyone to complain to me, oh, my kid is, he was there. Well, no, he's 5.5 standard deviations off that team's average. Just that's my kid. And I can show that based on these scores. But if we can narrow it down, sometimes there's 6, sometimes there's 8, sometimes there's 9, something like that in that bubble. And then we have evaluators that last day. They're looking specifically at those kids. They're evaluating those kids specifically, whether that's a scrimmage against another team, inter-squad scrimmage, or skill-based. And we're trying to force it onto there. Once we have that, call it cumulative ranking of that bubble of kids on that last day, then we pass it to a conversation from between coaches and the evaluators. Because in our little association, if I have a lot of our coaches are fathers and mothers of the kids, and so there's politics that fall into there. Because again, we're over here, we're all volunteers. In fact, in our bylaws, you cannot be compensated. Nobody can be compensated on the board of directors in our bylaws. So, which is not standard across the state by any means, but certainly it is from that perspective. So I know the first time I ever ran tryouts, we didn't have the software, and it was all on paper. And what was the challenge that a lot of evaluators preferred that. They want to write down, they got their notes, they got their system, they got papers all over and clipboards and that's all great. I think that they do a really good job. But then there were some evaluators that we'd bring in, and we always use 4 evaluators for every session. One is specifically looking at goalies only. The other 3 are looking at all the players, but they're mainly looking at your forwards and defensemen. They can make comments, and we encourage them to make comments on goalies, but we have specific different folks look at the goalies. So when we put them in that room, what would happen in the past is you'd have someone that was an evaluator afterwards doing the after action that was very opinionated, they were strong voiced, and they would leverage their opinion on the more meek evaluator because they didn't want to get in that battle. Well, now if that happens, they still can get into that conversation. We want them to have it, but I've got this concrete data that sits right there. I know where that quieter evaluator placed that player. And so then as for me, I try not to ever be an evaluator because I'm catching enough spears as it is. So I want to stay out and say, no, I didn't pick Johnny because I'm friends with his dad. So, but when I was in there in that room, if everyone's talking about one kid, but I know another kid was evaluated by another evaluator, I can then go and engage that evaluator and say, hey, Ron, looks like you have this kid a little bit higher. Will you talk about it? And then they'll go and they'll have that conversation. It gives you that benefit. But I have to tell you, the main reason that I brought Team Genius on, and what I think is the greatest feature of it for the specifically evaluation process, specifically in that tryout, is the post tryout feedback that you can do at the snap of a finger on all of these players. Because in the past, when we did it on paper, it was always open. Hey, if you have a question about your kid and where they got, we want feedback on your kid, give me a call. And then they'd call me, and then it would take me 20 minutes to go through all of the evaluators' evaluation forms, picking out each little score and everything that we had on that kid, and then any comments, and then kick an email back to that parent. And then that started the dialogue. Then they want to know, well, geez, are you sure he had qualified evaluator or whatever? But now I can hit the switch and it kicks it out. And it's detailed enough that they see, obviously, you get ranking on each skill and each day and whatever, all that sort of thing. but it's not so detailed that most of these folks can aggregate it in their head and then know, like, geez, you picked 14 kids, and if I do all this math and put it all together, my kid should have been number 15. Why didn't you cut the line at 15? Or something like that. Or even in the scenario where a coach gets to say, pick his last 3 or 4 kids, which we do that at times, depending on the scenario. If the kid they did the math, said, oh, my kid was 14 and you picked 15 kids, how come my kid didn't make it? Well, they're not able to really get that far with it, but they see all the feedback, and it eliminates, just frankly eliminates emails and questions that I get about where was my kid? How come my kid didn't get there? So that is, to me, the best thing. Now, I'll add to this, and I was talking to Gabe, emailing with him a couple weeks ago about this, is now we're at 4 or 5 years. I can't remember if this is our 5th year or 4th year that we've used it. But now we're seeing, we have this timeline of information going there. And so for those, again, I'm in Minnesota. So for us here in Minnesota, on the youth side, all we're trying to do all the time is develop a bunch of kids to push them into our high school program, which is not governed by USA Hockey, by the way. It's governed by the Minnesota State High School League. So it's a different entity, but it's all community-based. And this year we've got a new coaching staff at the high school level, turned over the whole staff, and they want to build a profile on every kid in the association. And that's what got me going. I thought, man, I think we already have that. I'm not sure how we mine that data, but I think we've already got it from an evaluation standpoint. So now it's giving them this basis. We can say, oh, thank you. I can just go and build off of what the team is up there. It's already set with. So to me, it saved me literally hours of giving feedback. It saved me on the ability to look at very specific numbers. So we tend to have all of our grading scales are a 1 to 5, and we fluctuate from year to year. I kind of give I talk to the evaluators that we're going to have beginning of the year, and I say, well, do you want to go in 1 point increments or 0.25, or what do you want? And it fluctuates. I really don't care, because in the end, it's just averages and math comes out. To me, it doesn't matter. But some of them like quarter increments. Great, they go in quarter increments. But now I have this very specific number on a kid. And for those who have not run a tryout with the software, I sit with my laptop during that session, and it's running live. It just keeps updating, live, update. So I can see what's happening. I can see whether or not the kids are getting looked at or not. And it makes it so much easier to ensure that every kid gets a view, every kid's going to have some score against them, and every kid's not going to have now comments this year. I'll tell you, man, it saves a lot. And I mean, it's the easiest thing with Treasure. I mean, I don't know, it's super cheap. So makes it easy to budget-wise for us to implement. For a small association that's all done with volunteers, that is done with a relatively low budget. Roland, I'd love to hear what your budget is for your association, but we run on, I think our budget's maybe $250,000, somewhere in that range or something that we run the whole thing off of. We need to have things affordable and efficient. And, like we said, I'm supposed to be working right now. I've got a real job during the day. So I would do this for a living if I could. It's just, my wife likes to have fun. So I will make one mention on the COVID side of things. We really don't know where we're going with that yet. The state of Minnesota, we're going to learn a lot today. At 2:00 Central Time, the governor is supposed to announce whether we're going to have school. And my understanding is that Minnesota Hockey is going to be attaching some things around what's going to happen with school. So there's some rumor that we might just be going online. If that happens, I think it's going to drop a bomb on Minnesota Hockey completely. And I don't know exactly what's going to happen. We might be an in-house program for the winter, which is going to be difficult with our numbers at the higher levels. But that said, right now, if we can go status quo, if I'm not mistaken, we can have pods of 25, and we're allowed 2 pods on the ice. So, heck, we can run a tryout with that for sure. It's 50 kids. Some logistics around keeping those pods separate, especially at the upper levels when you want to see a kid get ripping up the rink a little bit. But that said, that's easy enough to work with for us. So we're waiting. Today, we're going to know a lot more, and we'll start implementing a lot of things from that perspective. But quite honestly, I feel like our arena is going to have more work to do than we are to get prepared. So I'm hoping he's ready to go.
It is interesting to see how different provinces and different states are handling it. Trying to keep up with what's going on here, there, and everywhere. Where I am in Washington State, the schools are all going to stay online this fall.
They are.
Yeah, they've come out with that. Of course, I'm at ground zero. We had the first cases in the U.S. in my neighborhood, literally. So it's it hits close to home. So
Sure.
we've got almost a dozen folks with us. Lots of folks from Canada, Ontario, Alberta, Manitoba. So for those of you who are with us, what questions do you have for Roland and Brady? Either jump in with your microphone or type them into chat. What else do you want to know? Anyone? Wow. Roland, do you have some stuff to add to what Brady brought to the table?
No, I think what Brady said is fantastic, and it's the right approach from a day-to-day tryout. I think analyzing your kids, creating a process in which to use. I know we're exploring the concept of utilizing the Team Genius software as well. We're just in the process of determining our next step from a development person. We're along with our strategic plan, we're adjusting how we're employing a development person. Now, that being said, we do have very similar rules. Brady, my board of directors of 20, we are a not-for-profit organization. They cannot be compensated, but the board can hire staff. So we do have three full-time staff and one part-time staff who provide administration for approximately about 4,000 registrants. So we have 2,200 co-ed / boys registrants. We have about 500 girls registrants. We have 700 4-on-4 spring registrants. We have about 500 to 1,000. It fluctuates a fair bit. Fundamentals, entry level, learn to play registrants. We have 100 special hockey registrants. So we are kind of a bit of a unique, not the only, but somewhat unique beast to that. We are all hockey under one umbrella. And that's our goal, is boys, girls, elite, rep, special hockey. We're bringing sledge hockey on this year, so that'll be a few more players, with the idea that we're going to grow youth sledge hockey within our region. They used to have a very strong program, and for whatever reason it died off, and the group who had been running it has called us to say, what can we do together to regrow this, to strengthen the presence right here in our region for the kids in our community. And that's actually allowed us to build some relationships. My former life was a coordinator of athletics for the municipality. So I worked with all 40 minor sport groups, providing governance suggestions. And my role, I don't actually get on the ice and do any of the work. My role is strictly to talk about the logistics and to work on the business aspects, business partnerships, relationships, working with our governing bodies and working with our partners in the community, sponsors, so on and so forth. And then my staff do a bit more direct stuff from registration and so forth. And all of our coaches are volunteers, with the exception of our most elite teams. And we put that fee for them, rather than we pay it to them, it goes right in the team budget and the parents pay. You asked the question about what our budget was. Without team budgets, we're about $3.5 million a year. With team budgets, that would be considerably more. We also administer the local league for all of the girls. So even though the teams aren't ours, we administer the league for Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge. There's about 13 associations, without naming them all, that feed teams in. So we have a touchstone with just under 300 teams on a regular annual basis.
Wow. Yeah, different scale for sure.
We do have a couple of questions in the chat. Chris has a question about evaluators. Would you suggest coaches run tryouts, or do you use evaluators, separate evaluators?
Well,
What do
so
you
for
think,
us,
Brady?
yeah, so we do so for my choice, coaches would just do it. I think that they know what they're looking for their team. And in our scenario where we have a small association where a lot of these coaches happen to be coaching these kids a lot throughout the years, they tend to know who the better kids are. Now, granted, outside of the winter season, there's a lot going on in the spring, summer, fall where their kids are getting better. But they tend to know who these kids are and do that. But that said, we use both. So we use, the only thing we do not do is we do not pay an outside evaluator anymore to come in. And we did a study, not a study, we paid evaluators one year, and then we had non-paid evaluators on the side. And throughout the whole association, there were 2 kids different than what it was. So again, small association. So, but what we tend to do, our go-to is coaches from the level above. So if we evaluate Pee-wees, we try and pull Bantam coaches to evaluate those at that level. And we will bring outsiders. We've got, outsiders that want to come and they'll volunteer. Or we'll have community members that are hockey folks that, we've got folks in our community that have coached juniors and coached high school in the past and whatnot. So we'll bring them in. And so we have a mix of people that know the kids really well and a mix of people that don't know.
Okay.
Question.
A question from Nolan. Are you suggesting no contact battle drills at all for evaluation? Would be scrimmaging be considered out as well?
So for us in Ontario, we're not currently allowed contact drills or scrimmaging. I don't think we'll be allowed tryouts until those items come back in. I don't know how you can conduct a proper evaluation outside of drills if you are not playing the game at that level. If you're not minimizing the amount of space somebody gets and really understanding not only somebody's physical athletic ability, but their hockey IQ at the same time. And what line you take across that ice can drastically differ your success rate. and we know that as much as it's a really big ice surface and going fast is important, your ability to function in the small areas of the game, the small spaces. I've watched our local junior A team run their camps as well as run their practices. And I have seen them run on a regular basis, an entire half ice practice with 20-year-old junior A players that compete at a very high level. And they're using half the ice because everything's scrimmage and battle drills. So no, I can't say I can recommend that right now, at least in Ontario. And again, Hockey Eastern Ontario is a different branch than the OHF, and they have far fewer cases, so they may be recommending something different. And we'll know more from the Ontario Hockey Federation hopefully tomorrow. Their phase 3 plan A, B, C, D, E, and F are supposed to come out on Friday.
Okay. I think Nolan is from Manitoba. So,
yeah, I would recommend you check to see what they're allowed to do in Manitoba.
All right. Chet, you've got kind of a long set of questions. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask them, or do you want me to go ahead and read them?
I can unmute myself. Hopefully it'll come through.
Hey, we can hear you. Jump in.
Perfect. So we used the Team Genius app for a trial last year with our U10s. And basically the way we run it is our association uses paid independent evaluators. But we took aside 4 coaches and said, hey guys, try this system, see what you think, give us your feedback. And to speak to what Brady said there a second ago, we found that our coaches' evaluations were very much in line with what our independent evaluators said. But at the same time, I think the parents kind of like that independent versus the idea that maybe there's some politics going on behind the scenes. So, but what my questions are, we came across 2 issues. First, when we run our sessions, we usually run our first 2 sessions based on skills and battle drills. And then our 3rd session is usually a game situation. And we try to weight the game situation to be worth a little bit more. And we had a problem sort of integrating that into the program last year. I don't know if that's something that's been addressed or worked on, being able to weight different sessions differently.
Yeah.
So that's the first question.
You want me to take that, or do you want me to?
Go ahead,
Okay.
Brady.
Yeah, you definitely can weight them differently, but what we found was that no matter where and how we weighted the different sessions like that, their scores earlier, for whatever reason, affected their ultimate outcome later on. So if they scored higher on the first two sessions, it was very difficult if they were outside statistically for them to climb back in. And we did it exactly like what you're describing. We did 2 skill sessions, and then we went to 2 scrimmages at the highest levels. So peewees and animals, we would do a scrimmage with another association. And so we've flipped that. And what I've come to this conclusion, which is completely unscientific and just based on my own experience, and not that bright, because I had a lot of concussions in college. But that said, what we came to is that bit of hockey sense that we try to evaluate, that part of that, the part that you can't see someone doing on cones and just in those skills things, is it comes out in spades in the scrimmages. But if they're weighted so low on the skills, they just can't overcome that. So we've flipped it now. So we start first day with an inter-squad scrimmage. So you can kind of extrapolate these kids, because hockey sense is what all the coaches want. They want the skills too, but they'll definitely take a kid who's really smart on the ice and goes to the right place and makes smart plays before a kid who looks really good going around cones, right? And so it's that kind of deal. So for us, we actually now weight them the exact same, but we put the scrimmages up front, and then we kind of work backwards from there and do some skills things and small area games at the end, specific to some of those bubble kids. That's just what we've done. Again, it's not scientific on my end.
Awesome. That's great. It's a new way of looking at it, something that we can think about. And yeah, maybe that's it, right? You see the game sense and stuff right away, and it gives you an idea, and then you narrow it down based on the individual skills after. Cool. So the second part of the question is, since we do use independent paid evaluators, the one thing that we've come across, like we talked to them after and we said, would you guys be willing to use this system? And they were pretty hesitant. They said, we have our way. This is how we like to do it. Is there a way that you can bring in, an independent evaluation into the process? Say we had 3 coaches doing it, but we still wanted to have that independent evaluator. Is this something that we could basically take their sheet and incorporate it in on our own after into the system?
I don't know. I think we're just exploring it right now, but we do something very similar with our tryouts. Is our coaches are leading and running, and we have independent evaluators wherever we may feel that there are politics. So, for example, if Roland's kid is going to be on a team, we have an independent evaluator there, and their job is to assess, is the evaluation of the coaches and Roland's daughter a fair assertion of where they belong, right? If she's ranked 40th and they're picking her as their second center, there's a problem.
Yeah,
and that can be the case. But the coaches do need to, as Brady was even saying, they need to have some say and some input. They're building a team. And I think we all know a team is more than just the sum of some numbers on paper. It's hockey sense. It's how the kids work together. When those two are on the ice together, they might be a 12, but when they're separate, they might be a 2-4s, right? So how do we combine to make the best team that we can? We just simply mandate it. Like we would mandate the use of that with the independent contractor. If they're paid, they don't get a choice, right? I know if they're the only game in town, you might run into some trouble, but if they're not, they're going to come to do what you need them to do, because that's what you're going to tender or contract out. You don't give them a choice. Hi, we are looking for people to come use our software and to facilitate this. And if they're not willing to do it, where you work with them is what are the things you want to evaluate? How do I put these into the program to design the report that will get us the best results? And that's where you need those hockey brains to really give you that qualified and competent feedback. You know, I was very fortunate my first few years here to work with the esteemed Patrick Dougherty, and those in the high-end hockey group amongst Hockey Canada will know he was one of the grandfathers of hockey with Walter Gretzky and looking at things. And, you know, there's a guy who could walk out onto the ice and when a kid is 5, look at him and go, that's going to be someone special. And I'm looking at a kid going, he's ankle skating. What are you talking about? and, you know, 5 years later, that's your top line center. And not because Pat said so, but because he was able to do that. So, you know, we would listen to him. What are you looking at? What are you saying? What are you doing? And we put those details into our selection sheets, right? And that hopefully helps guide that. And the tool can be manipulated, from my understanding, what I've seen so far, to track the things you want it to track.
Right. So chat. I'll add just a smidge from my coach perspective, which is, yes, one of the key pieces is identifying what are those criteria you really want to use to evaluate your players. And there is a component to Team Genius. In the event your tablet or your cell phone broke and you had to do it on paper, there is a way, once you've got those criteria figured out, to input that data after the fact. Whether it's a technology problem or whether it's a I want to do it on paper issue, there is a way to do that. Nolan?
I gotta jump off real quick, but I'll say something to Nolan's question real quick on there.
Good.
Nolan, the bottom line on that for us is we've got to have the best evaluators we can, because it's such a subjective thing on what they're looking for from the perspective of hockey sense. And so then, if we already know who the coach is going to be, we've already hired that coach, we have to have them talk to the evaluators and give them their opinion on it. But you're dead on. Everyone looks at it differently. You know, I tend to look at it as the kid in the right spot without the puck. And you know, that, but again, I don't always try to evaluate, but when I have, that's what I'm looking for hockey sense. It seems like they know where they should be at. But I apologize, Ben, Ruth, and everyone on the call, because I'm 1 minute late for a work deal here. So I'm gonna fail on you guys. Thank you so much, though, for inviting me to be on there. Good luck to everybody. Maybe you can send my info.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
So Roland, do you want to say anything to Nolan's question about evaluators and hockey sense?
Really, that's what we're relying on our coaches for. So rather than the independent evaluators, it's part of what they look at when they're evaluating things, but we're looking at our coaches because they've gone out to watch the kid. We typically select our coaches before the end of the next coming season. So they're able to go out and start watching. And when we're in our coach selection process, so let's say AAA, we're looking to announce coaches in December. We're telling every coach who's applied, go start watching kids now, because we're going to ask you specifics during your interview, right? What are you seeing? Where are you going? What's the general pulse of this age group? You know, and we get a fair amount of feedback about how our program's doing as well, then even during the interview process for coaches.
Wonderful.
Can you hear me? It's Nolan.
Hey, Nolan, jump in.
I think my question was more geared towards how I think Brady had said they moved the scrimmage to the first skate.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we have, you know, AA where we did that. We already have the coaches selected for that. But the A level, which we will be using Team Genius for as well, we don't know until the second weekend of tryouts, because you're basing that a lot on which kids are in the top 10, because their parents are generally coaching. So that's where I was more questioning, how do you, like, again, I've been a coach, obviously now I'm in this role. I look at, you know, I have my own feel for what hockey sense is or positional play, and I'm the same way, but I also know that we're all human and we always look at the extremes. And when you're watching a scrimmage, you're watching the kids who are hungry for the puck a lot of times. And I guess that was my question. If you move that to the beginning of the tryout, before the coaches are involved, does that not then give you a way higher ranking on really just aggressive kids rather than, you know, positional players?
Oh, wow. You know, I can put you in touch with Brady, and maybe you can continue that
Yeah.
conversation a little bit more. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, we are a little bit over time, but thank you, Roland, for being with us. Thank you, Brady. I know you had to leave. And thank you, the rest of you, for being with us. I hope you got something out of today. If you need to reach us, feel free, either Ben@teamgenius.com or Ruth@teamgenius.com. We'd be happy to help you out and answer your questions. Thank you.